Some aged care homes are running at just 50% capacity due to worker shortages. The Committee for Economic Development conducted research into the situation and is now calling for urgent reform. Cassandra Winzar is CEDA's Chief Economist and joins us now from Perth. Cassandra Winzar, welcome. So what is the extent of vacant aged care beds because of staff shortages?
So there's substantial vacant beds across the country, and when we look at the overall number, there's around 14% of beds that are vacant. That's pretty significant, and that's been increasing over the past couple of decades. But what is actually worse, even worse than that, is when we look at some of the disparity in the figures, and some homes are operating at capacity levels as low as 50%, and they're usually in regional areas because they're struggling to attract the staff that they need to be able to fully staff their facilities and open all the beds. And this is a real challenge when we have increasing demand for aged care services and wait lists for most of these providers.
Yeah, and so what is demand like?
So demand is really high and it's growing for aged care overall, for both residential and home care. And there are waiting lists across the country for many residential facilities. And what we're seeing happen is that because there aren't these aged care beds for people to move into, the people are either getting inadequate care at home or they're getting stuck in hospitals. And hospitals are not a great place to be if you don't need to be there, and they're not designed for people to stay there longer term. So we're hearing that people are staying in hospital much longer than they need to because there isn't capacity in the aged care sector to take them.
And so increasing pressure on the hospital system too.
Absolutely, and it's a very expensive way to care for people. Hospitals aren't set up, they're not aged care facilities. It's really expensive and it's not good quality of life for people who are having to stay there longer than they should.
And how have recent regulatory requirements affected the sector?
So we've had some changes fairly recently which have come out of the findings of the Royal Commission, which was 2.5 years ago. So that's an increase in aged care staffing minutes per client in the aged care home, and a requirement for 24/7 registered nurses in homes as well. These are good reforms, but they haven't taken into account what conditions are actually like in the sector and in the labour market. So they are the sort of things that we should be aspiring to, but we don't have the workforce to be able to meet those levels of staffing at the moment. And because of that, we are seeing care homes reduce their capacity, and in some cases even closing altogether because they can't meet the staffing requirements.
So you say those requirements are good reforms, but it seems that you're suggesting the requirement that they be introduced be postponed.
Look, I think it's around some implementation challenges and making sure that the government is supporting the workforce in other ways as well. So looking at pay and conditions and attracting people to the industry and looking at the timing of that and what might be achievable. So it might need to be slowed a little bit, but we really need to be putting all the effort that we can into increasing this workforce so we can provide higher quality care to all older Australians, which is what the key findings of the Royal Commission were, that we were not providing high enough quality of care, and we haven't made any real progress on that 2.5 years in.
But if we're not providing high enough quality care and the Royal Commission has recommended this regulation be introduced, you're suggesting it kind of be postponed for some operations in the aged care sector. Are you really comfortable suggesting that?
Look, I think it would have to happen for some of homes, particularly some of the smaller homes that are struggling. But what's most important is that we look at all the other options to increase the workforce, because we do need to increase staffing levels. So we need to look at how we can attract more people to the sector, and we really need to look at the role of migration, because the huge number of workers that we need, and we're predicting that if we don't make any changes, we'll be short 110,000 workers by 2030. The huge number of workers that we need can't be met through the domestic workforce alone. We're going to have to look at the role of migration and having better visa systems and better conditions for migrants that are qualified and motivated and want to work in the sector.
And accommodation would have to be addressed as well. I think I've read somewhere today, someone was suggesting, I'm not sure if it was you, but that some of these aged care operators should start building accommodation for their workers too.
So that's one of the big challenges that we found, particularly in the regional areas, that there's no rentals available, or if they are available, they're completely unaffordable for someone on an aged care wage, which remains very low. So we need to look at how we can expand accommodation. This is a challenge throughout Australia, but we particularly see it in regional areas with really high costs of living and struggling to attract essential workers. So we need to look at how we can build more housing in these areas. The government has committed to 1.2 million new homes under the Housing Accord, so we think some of that should be prioritised for key workers in the regions, and also looking at whether there might be a role for some rental subsidies as well to lower some of those costs. But there's certainly a role for providers as well, and we do hear from providers that they understand these challenges and they are looking at ways to accommodate their staff if that's something they can do.
And just how urgent is it that this is addressed?
It's incredibly urgent. We've been talking about this for a couple of years now. We saw the findings of the Royal Commission, which was showing that aged care homes were understaffed and not providing the quality of care that is required. But we haven't seen anything that's changing the trajectory. So we've got staff shortages now, but they're only going to get worse if we don't do something. So we really need to address this. We need more action from government, and we need to increase the number of workers in the sector.
Okay, Cassandra Winzar from CEDA, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.